Rain chased Juliet for years, and the industry jokingly called him Juliet's lapdog. On her 18th birthday, Juliet agreed to be with him. At 19, they tasted forbidden fruit and became addicted, leaving traces of their passion everywhere. At 25, Juliet used suicide to force marriage, but only received a cold response from Rain. "I'm a non-marriage advocate." Juliet left in a huff, only to see 4 words in the man's social media a year later: "Want to get married." She packed her bags and rushed back home in excitement, only to witness Rain proposing to another woman. Juliet smiled self-deprecatingly and married someone else. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful stories every day. Now the story begins. City N Airport. Juliet had just stepped out of the terminal with her luggage when she saw the large screens in the square flooded with news from 3 hours ago. It was a proposal video, with bold text underneath. Rain spares no expense to propose to his girlfriend, a Cinderella and Prince Charming fairytale romance. Juliet turned pale, her meticulously manicured nails digging into her palms. When she opened her social media feed, she saw Rain had posted a new update after thinking about marriage, proposal successful. She recognized the video background as Rain's favorite club. Without another thought, Juliet immediately hailed a taxi and rushed over. Upon arriving at the club, she effortlessly made her way to the top-floor VIP room frequented by those young masters. Just as she was about to push the door open, she heard familiar voices coming from inside. "Rain, you've only been with Lauren for a year and you're already getting married. What does that make Juliet, who's been with you all these years?" Juliet instinctively froze. Rain remained silent for a few seconds before replying irritably, "Finding true love isn't easy for me. Lauren will be your sister-in-law from now on, so show some respect. As for Juliet, I've long grown tired of her after all these years." At this point, his voice carried a disdainful laugh. "She even threatened suicide to force me into marriage. How cheap." Juliet felt her heart suddenly sink, instinctively raising a hand to touch the watch on her left wrist. Beneath the wide watchband hid the hideous scar from her wrist cutting a year ago, as if mocking her. A year ago, Juliet's family hinted at their desire for her to enter an arranged marriage, so she took the initiative to propose to Rain, but the man's response was, "I'm not done having fun yet." In a fit of anger, she slit her wrist with a razor blade as a threat. Rain simply turned away indifferently, leaving only these words: "Juliet, I'm a marriage-free advocate." At this moment Juliet finally realized it wasn't about not having played enough, but about being utterly bored. It felt like being pierced through the chest. The pain was excruciating. Amidst the raucous laughter inside, Juliet pushed the door open forcefully. "Rain." Rain turned to look. Under the neon lights, those wicked eyes momentarily froze in surprise. In an instant, he continued nonchalantly, "Juliet, when did you get back? Perfect timing though. I'm getting married in a month. After all these years of friendship, if you're free, come be a bridesmaid." It felt like seawater was flooding over her head. Juliet's breathing became labored. Rain had been pursuing her since middle school. At 14 or 15, she said she didn't want to date so young. The boy had been chasing her until he turned 18. From middle school through high school to college, who didn't envy them? Yet now, all they got in return was a single phrase, "old friends." That unwillingness made her unable to hold back her accusation. "Weren't you a marriage-free advocate?" Rain lowered his head and took a sip of wine, his thin lips moistened by the alcohol. In those years, it was these very lips that kissed every inch of Juliet's body, yet now they resemble a bow, shooting arrows straight into her heart. "In those ignorant years, I never met someone I truly wanted to cherish. Now that I have, I only wish to give her the very best." His smile was cold and detached, causing Juliet's inner walls of love to crumble instantly. Juliet felt tears welling up in her eyes. Clenching her palms, she forced herself to curve her lips into a smile. "Is that so? Then I wish you a happy marriage and everlasting harmony." With these words, Juliet turned and left the private room. As soon as she returned home, Mortimer's parents were waiting there. Seeing her, Mrs. Mortimer beamed. "Finally decided to come back. It's good that you're home." As if suddenly remembering something, he grew worried again. "I heard Rain is getting married. You're not here to crash the wedding, are you, Mr. Mortimer?" Had been smiling too, but at these words, the corners of his mouth turned down as he snorted coldly. He never liked Rain and had even arranged a marriage with an old friend from City H, hoping Juliet would marry into their family. Because of this, father and daughter had quarreled many times. At this thought, Juliet felt a pang in her heart. Taking a deep breath, she interrupted her mother. "Mom, Dad, I don't want Rain anymore. I've decided to marry into the Lester family of City H for an alliance." Mrs. Mortimer widened her eyes in shock, but before she could react, Mr. Mortimer decisively asked, "When?" "I'll make arrangements immediately." Juliet recalled Rain's words and pressed her lips together. 1 month from now. By then, Rain would marry, and she would wed. From then on, they would live apart, north and south, with no connection left. Watching Mr. Mortimer rush off to call his old friend in a frenzy, Mrs. Mortimer wore a face full of worry. Juliet, marriage is crucial for a woman, don't act impulsively. Besides, after all these years with Rain, can you really just cut ties so abruptly? Mrs. Mortimer's palm was dry and warm, like a warm current washing away the pain in Juliet's heart. She suppressed the tears in her eyes. Mom, Rain and I have nothing to do with each other anymore. I trust the person Dad chose. Mrs. Mortimer hesitated for a long moment before finally just hugging her. It's your decision. As long as you're happy, Mom will definitely support you. Juliet nodded with reddened eyes. I will be happy, I will. When Juliet returned to her room, the first thing she saw were all the items related to Rain filling the space. From the oversized beanbag by the floor-to-ceiling window to the diamond earrings on the dressing table, they had lived together for so long that the gifts he gave her became too numerous to keep. Eventually having to be sent back to the Mortimer residence, now each object felt like a thorn laced with memories, piercing Juliet's heart until it bled. Juliet closed her eyes briefly and called out to the door, Nanny Wang, replace everything in the room. Nanny Wang entered the room with several maids. Miss, everything. Juliet nodded. Yes, not a single thing left. As the room was gradually emptied, it felt as if the deeply rooted emotions in Juliet's heart were being slowly pulled out. Suddenly, the phone vibrated without warning. Seeing the word Rain flashing on the screen, her breath caught, her fingers trembling, she still answered the call. The man's voice no longer held its former tenderness, leaving only an indifferent chill. Since you're back in the country, come take all this junk away tomorrow. Juliet was about to tell him to just throw it all away, but before she could speak, the call had already ended. The next day, Juliet hesitated for a long time but went anyway. Standing at the entrance of the villa they once shared, she instinctively pressed her fingerprint against the scanner, but what reached her ears was a harsh, mechanical electronic voice, fingerprint error, unauthorized entry. She froze in place as the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was a woman with straight black hair cut in blunt bangs, wearing a white dress, the very picture of innocence. Juliet had seen her yesterday on the square's giant screen. The woman Rain had proposed to Lauren. Lauren looked at her with a slightly pursed, shy smile. Sorry to make you come all this way. Rain wanted to throw everything away to spare me overthinking, but I thought it'd be better to return them to their rightful owner, she said, turning slightly to the side. Juliet immediately saw her belongings scattered haphazardly across the living room floor. Among them was the shattered remains of a glazed vase she'd once bought at auction for a small fortune. That was her favorite vase. Rain, every time he gave her flowers, she would carefully trim and arrange them in it. Lauren followed her gaze and said apologetically, Rain got drunk last night and broke it. We haven't had time to clean it up yet. Miss Juliet, if you mind, we can buy you a new one. As she spoke, she assumed the demeanor of a hostess, bending down to pick up the fragments. Actually, back in college, Juliet had met Lauren before. Back then, Lauren also appeared delicate and fragile. Yet Rain didn't even spare her a glance. He said, a white lotus, obviously pretentious. Nowhere near as genuine as our Juliet. Yet soon, he would be marrying this white lotus and bringing her home. Juliet smirked self-deprecatingly. No need, Miss Wen. These are all things that are no longer of any use. Before she could finish speaking, Lauren suddenly cried out in pain as crimson blood dripped from her fingertips. Juliet frowned and stepped forward to examine her wound, but just as she reached out, a powerful force from the side shoved her to the ground. Her palm pressed against shards on the floor, sending a piercing pain through her. Rain's pitying voice sounded overhead. Lauren, are you all right? Juliet looked up at them and saw Rain gingerly take Lauren's injured fingertip into his mouth. The gesture stung her eyes with pain. Lauren withdrew her hand sheepishly. Rain, I'm fine, and don't blame Miss Juliet, I just wanted to help her tidy up, help her pack. Rain instantly furrowed his brows. Looking at Juliet, don't you have hands of your own? The man who once couldn't bear to let her go to the bathroom alone now looked at her as if she were trash. Juliet took a deep breath and stood up from the floor. It's all junk anyway. I don't want any of it. Rain frowned and kicked a bundle of things at her feet toward her. Up to you, but you'll have to take these filthy things with you. Juliet looked down at the scattered items, feeling all the blood in her body rush to her head, her entire face burning with humiliation. Rain had thrown out none other than the seductive lingerie she used to wear. Across from her, Rain scooped Lauren up in his arms and carried her toward the bedroom, speaking softly while coaxing. There, I'll tend to your wound right away. Juliet stared at those clothes, her palm clenching tightly, blood from her wound dripping heavily onto the pristine white floor. Dirty. But weren't these the very clothes Rain had given her? Begging and coaxing her to wear them. From a nearby room, Lauren's coquettish voice drifted out intermittently. Don't be like this, Rain. Miss Juliet is still here. Then came Rain's hoarse voice. Shy, don't be afraid, don't hold back, let it out. Juliet tasted blood in her throat, the same words Rain had once said to her. In the bedroom, in the bathroom, in every corner of this villa, she stood in the empty living room, feeling only an endless chill seeping into her very bones. So cold. Juliet pulled out a Zippo lighter from her bag. Click. She threw the lit lighter directly onto the pile of lingerie. The flames instantly leaped up, triggering the smoke alarm in the villa. The shrill alarm instantly drowned out the faint murmurs in the room. Rain rushed out bare-chested, his body still marked with suggestive red traces. The desire in his eyes turned to anger. Juliet, are you insane? Juliet curled her lips and retorted, did you just find out today? With that, she no longer looked at Rain, untied the silk scarf from her neck, casually wrapped it around her hand to stop the bleeding from her wound, then turned and walked away without hesitation, her high heels clicking decisively. Rain watched that retreating figure, feeling a strange sensation rise in his heart. Back then, everyone said he was Juliet's lapdog, but only he knew how much Juliet loved him. For him, the wealthy heiress Juliet compromised time and again, lowering her standards. Nearby, Lauren's scream snapped him out of his thoughts. Rain, why is there a fire? By the time Rain finished putting out the fire, Juliet's figure had long disappeared from sight. Meanwhile, Juliet went to the hospital to bandage her hand before heading to the mall for some shopping. After throwing away all the gifts Rain had given her yesterday, the room instantly felt empty and desolate. She didn't return home until evening after her shopping spree. As soon as they entered the house, Mrs. Mortimer pulled her into the room. Juliet, today the Rain family sent an invitation. Juliet felt the wound on her hand sting again. A wedding invitation. Mrs. Mortimer sighed. No, in a few days it will be Rain's birthday. To help his fiancée integrate into the circle, he's hosting a banquet. I know you're upset. But after all, our families have known each other for years, and there are still many business dealings between us. Before she could finish, Juliet interrupted. I understand, Mother. I'll attend and won't embarrass the Mortimer family. Mrs. Mortimer patted her shoulder with relief. You've grown up. After Mrs. Mortimer left, Juliet stared blankly at the array of new evening gowns hanging in the room. Had her mother not mentioned it, she would have completely forgotten about Rain's birthday. There was a time when she could remember every single date related to Rain with perfect clarity. Then, she forced a smile again. Good, at least it proves that no one is truly unforgettable, and no one can't live without another. Rain's birthday banquet was scheduled a week later. On that day, Juliet arrived right on time at Rain's family estate. As soon as she entered, Rain's mother, Mrs. Benson, waved at her. Has Juliet arrived? Juliet walked over to greet her. Auntie, long time no see. Mrs. Benson looked at her with concern. I don't know why you ran off abroad all by yourself. Look how thin you've gotten. Juliet smiled without responding. Mrs. Benson had always been fond of her and was especially pleased to see her with Rain. At this moment, a slightly cold voice came from behind. Rain said, Mom, Lauren is the daughter-in-law of our Rain family. You should take good care of her. Juliet turned her head and saw Lauren standing beside Rain, looking somewhat uneasy. Madam Benson glanced at them indifferently. You protect her like she's the apple of your eye. Why would she need me? Rain looked at Juliet and snorted coldly, clearly thinking she had been complaining to Madam Benson. As a war seemed imminent, Juliet withdrew her hand. Auntie, you must be busy. I'll go greet my friends first. No sooner had she stepped away from the center than whispers drifted into Juliet's ears. This Lauren really has some tricks up her sleeve, actually managing to snatch Rain away from Juliet. More than that, to get her through the door. Rain even endured the family discipline before Madam Benson finally relented. I originally thought Rain spoiled Juliet enough back then, but compared to Lauren, it's like comparing a minor witch to a great one. As for those words, Juliet pretended not to hear them and walked over to a few friends she was close with, but she had barely exchanged a few words with her friends when Rain's icy voice cut through. Juliet, stop appearing in front of my mother and spouting nonsense in the future. I won't get back together with you. My future wife will only be Lauren. The surrounding gazes instantly turned peculiar, and some guests began whispering among themselves. Juliet has stooped to this level. Ah, come to think of it, men's love grows shallower while women's love grows deeper. Juliet froze for a moment before realizing that Madam Benson must have said something to Rain. To say Madam Benson particularly liked her would be an overstatement. It was all about family interests. No matter what, her presence this time represents the face of the Mortimer family. Juliet suppressed the bitterness in her heart and said expressionlessly, What reconciliation, young Master Benson? Please don't insult my reputation with such words. I'm about to get married. The moment these words were spoken, The surroundings fell into complete silence. Meanwhile, Rain, after a momentary daze, wore an even colder smirk. That's just wonderful. Juliet's hand trembled slightly as she held the wine glass. She took a deep breath and set the glass on the table. To avoid misunderstandings, it's better if we keep our distance. With that, she turned and walked away from the crowd. Behind her, Rain's friend asked, "Is Juliet really getting married?" Rain's lazy, disdainful voice clearly reached Juliet's ears. "She's already been ruined by me. Who would take her? It's just to save face for myself." Juliet turned pale, her nails digging into her palms, yet the pain in her palms couldn't compare to the ache in her heart. She wanted to leave, but just as she reached the artificial lake in the garden, someone called out to stop her. "Where is Miss Juliet going?" She turned to look and found it was Lauren. Lauren's smile was perfect, yet somehow utterly false. Juliet frowned slightly, unwilling to engage with her further. "I have matters to attend to, so I'll be going now." Lauren suddenly stepped forward and grabbed her. "Juliet, you know what? Ever since I saw you in college, I've wanted to be good friends with you." Juliet looked at her, almost wanting to laugh. "Good thing that didn't happen. Otherwise, with my best friend and boyfriend getting together, my humiliation would have been even greater." Lauren twisted her face for a moment, gripping Juliet's hand even tighter. She leaned in and whispered, "Big joke, not big enough." Juliet hadn't even processed what was happening when Lauren yanked her into the artificial lake. Water rushed into her nose and mouth. She flailed in panic, only to find the water wasn't deep at all. She had just stood up when a blur flashed before her eyes. Rain rushed into the water and pulled the still flailing Lauren into her arms. After hurriedly carrying the person in her arms ashore and confirming Lauren was unharmed, Rain turned a dark expression toward Juliet, who had climbed onto the bank by herself. "Juliet, don't test my limits." Many guests also gathered around. Juliet stood there in disarray, her soaked dress clinging to her curves. A cold wind blew, making her shiver involuntarily. Lauren tugged at Rain's coat wrapped around her, with droplets on her lashes that could have been tears or lake water. Her voice trembled. "Miss Juliet, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pull you when I fell. It was just instinct when you pushed me." Seeming to realize the crowd around her, she quickly changed her tone. "It was all an accident. Sorry for worrying everyone." All eyes were fixed on Juliet. Juliet pulled at her pale lips and sneered. "Do you think this is some ancient harem drama? There are surveillance cameras everywhere here, don't you know?" The words were barely out of her mouth when Lauren flashed a panicked look in her eyes. Juliet looked at Rain and said, "Check the surveillance footage." "Enough," the man said coldly. "Juliet, this is the Rain residence, not the Mortimer household. You don't get to call the shots here," Rain said softly as she brushed away Lauren's hair sticking to her cheek. "Go change your clothes." The two turned and walked away entwined, making the solitary Juliet seem all the more like a joke. Many people appear to offer comfort, but in reality, they're just kicking someone when they're down. Forget it, Juliet, don't dwell on it. Those two have actually been together for a while now. "Yeah, I caught them checking into the Bulgari Hotel 3 years ago, but I thought it was just a fling." Some even teased, "Juliet, there are plenty of good men out there. If you're not getting married, you and I could give it a shot. I don't mind that thing with Brother Benson." Juliet's fingers were icy and stiff, her heart gradually sinking into the dark depths of that lake. 3 years ago, precisely 1 year after she and Rain had graduated from university. During that period, Rain had indeed stopped clinging to her as before. She simply thought he was under too much pressure after taking over the Benson Corporation, never suspecting his infidelity. So even those few remaining beautiful memories between her and Rain were nothing but her own self-deception. This truth made the wound in her heart fester and rot as if accelerated. Beyond any cure, at that moment, a black suit jacket was suddenly draped over her shoulders. A deep, magnetic voice came from behind. "Be careful not to catch a cold." The faint warmth snapped her out of her daze. She looked up and met a face with sharp, impossibly handsome features, staring at the unfamiliar man. Her body stiffened with wary alertness. "Who are you?" The man raised an eyebrow slightly. "Kane." Juliet froze. It was him, her fiancé whom she had never met before. Just as Juliet was lost in thought, Kane spoke again. "Come with me." Juliet tightened her coat and followed. "What brings you here?" The man ahead didn't turn back. "Came to City End for business. Had dinner with Uncle Lin. Heard you were here, so came to see you." As luck would have it, she witnessed the entire commotion just now. Juliet wasn't sure Kane had been watching, nor how he might view her now. After a moment's hesitation, she spoke hoarsely. "There was indeed a ridiculous fling between me and Rain. I never intended marriage fraud. I'd planned to meet you before the wedding to explain everything. The Lester family was City H's elite aristocracy, and she had no desire to make such a formidable enemy for the Mortimers." She bit her lip and lowered her lashes. "If Mr. Lester minds, our engagement can be called off." Kane halted in his tracks. "Juliet, with her head down and not looking, walked straight into him. Perhaps it was the pain from bumping her nose, but all the pent-up grievances surged up at once. Her eyes reddened in an instant. Cain lowered his eyes to look at her without speaking. Juliet said with a nasal tone, "We could also sign a prenuptial agreement. After marriage, I won't interfere with your private affairs. I'll just be a good luck charm whenever you need me to appear, Mrs. Lester." Cain replied in an even tone, "I'll take you home first, in the car." The two remained silent the entire way until the vehicle stopped at the gate of the Mortimer residence. Cain finally said in a deep voice, "Juliet, everyone has a past. I, too, once loved someone for many years, but fate wasn't on our side. Still, I won't cross the line, if you don't mind. You should focus on preparing for the wedding." Juliet's heart, which had been hanging in suspense, finally settled. She let out a long sigh of relief and curled her lips into a smile. "I don't mind." Cain stared fixedly at her, the emotions in his eyes indecipherable. After a long pause, he nodded faintly. "All right, now that this is over, I need to catch my flight." He came and went in such a hurry that Juliet almost thought it was all a dream. Because of the soaking, Juliet's already scabbed wound began to inflame again. That night, Juliet tossed and turned until the early hours before finally managing to fall asleep. When she woke up, her entire palm was in excruciating pain. Forcing her to return to the hospital, after getting treated and bandaged, she entered the elevator carrying her medication. While looking down at the medical instructions, she stepped out as soon as the elevator doors opened. Looking up, I fell straight into Rain's pitch-black eyes. He had been leaning lazily against the wall, but when his gaze dropped to the bandages wrapped around Juliet's hand, his pupils contracted slightly. Juliet didn't notice his expression. Her eyes fell on the gynecology sign hanging nearby, and her heart sank as she turned to leave. Meanwhile, Rain recalled what he'd heard yesterday. Feeling inexplicably irritated, he sneered, "I heard some pretty boy came to pick you up yesterday. So why are you alone today?" Juliet paused mid-step and replied coldly, "None of your business." Rain studied her for a long moment before nodding with sudden understanding. "Juliet, I don't like you anymore. Whether it's playing hard to get or deliberately finding someone to make me jealous, these tricks won't work." Juliet frowned and was about to speak when a soft, delicate voice interrupted from nearby. "Rain, I've finished the examination." Lauren came out and saw Juliet, a trace of resentment flashing in her eyes. But in an instant, she smiled and took Rain's arm. "Rain, the doctor said I'm already 1 month pregnant, and you need to control yourself from now on." Rain paused for a moment, then let out a low chuckle from his chest. He reached up and ruffled Lauren's hair. "Whatever you say, Mrs. Benson." Lauren threw herself into his arms, then asked cautiously, "Aunt Benson will be happy to hear this news, won't she?" Rain kissed her forehead. "Of course." Juliet watched this scene, her throat tightening as if gripped by an invisible hand. Back then, she had also fantasized about what Rain's child would look like, but Rain either used condoms or made her take birth control pills. He said, "I don't like kids, they're too noisy. I just want to live in a world of two with you." Only now did she realize he didn't dislike children, he just didn't want to have them with her. Thinking of this, Juliet actually felt relieved. Fortunately, she had no children, so she wouldn't be reduced to the most wretched state. Lauren cuddled with Rain for a while, then turned to look at Juliet. "Miss Juliet, I heard you're getting married too. I hope some of my luck rubs off on you." Her eyes brimmed with unconcealed smugness. Juliet suppressed her suffocating ache and smiled. "Thank you for your kindness, but I don't need to rely on a child to elevate my status." As soon as she finished speaking, Lauren turned pale, her eyes instantly welling up with tears. Rain darkened his gaze and grabbed Juliet's wrist, apologized to Lauren. His grip was unusually strong, and Juliet felt as though her wrist might shatter. She gritted her teeth and shook him off. "What did I say wrong?" Rain wanted to step forward but was blocked by Lauren, her eyes reddened. "Forget it, Rain. Miss Juliet is right, my humble background makes me unworthy of you." Rain held her in his arms, heart aching, while casting a cold glance at Juliet. "So what if you're a wealthy heiress, aren't you just as shameless and cheap in bed?" The utterly emotionless words crushed Juliet's self-esteem beneath their heel. A sudden chill left her limbs frozen. She had refused all those shameful actions and words from Rain at first, until he coaxed her gently again and again. "Juliet, don't you love me? I swear I'll treat you well forever." The dignity she had sacrificed for love now became the blade Rain wielded against her. "Rain, don't you have a heart?" Juliet trembled through clenched teeth. She couldn't comprehend why the Rain who once treated her as his most precious treasure had become like this. From 14 to 26. They had been entangled for 12 years, yet she felt as if she had never truly known Rain at all. Rain looked at her, his disdain almost palpable. "My heart belongs to Lauren. Though she comes from humble origins, her soul is noble. She is my most compatible soulmate." With that, He took Lauren by the hand and left. Juliet watched their retreating figures. Her vision blurred by tears, her heart aching so intensely she could barely breathe. That very night, Juliet heard the news of Lauren's pregnancy spreading throughout their entire social circle. Unwed pregnancy was considered disgraceful in well-bred families, yet Rain might have been too overjoyed, making a grand announcement of it. Within 2 days, the Mortimer family also sent out invitations for the bridal banquet, but the groom's name was conspicuously absent. The entire high society of City N was abuzz with speculation about the groom's identity, creating quite a stir. Juliet stayed at home, determined to ignore the outside commotion, but an old friend who used to get along well with her, Lucy, came to ask, "Juliet, are you really getting married?" Not to save face, nor to spite Rain, Juliet was momentarily stunned, feeling both heartbroken and amused. Even now, her friends still believe she wouldn't marry anyone else. She asked, "In your eyes, do I love Rain so much that I can't live without him in this lifetime?" Lucy gave a mocking smile. "Your invitation didn't even include the groom's name. Everyone's speculating whether you're waiting for Rain to change his mind." After a moment's hesitation, Juliet exhaled, "This has nothing to do with Rain. My new husband's identity is rather special, so let's not bring this up again." Her marriage to Kane wasn't just a simple union, it involved the strategic alliance of two families. With many PR statements still being prepared, they had already agreed to announce the wedding news only on the day of the ceremony itself. Lucy thought she was just being stubborn and sighed, but didn't say anything more. With just half a month left before the wedding, Kane called. "Since the wedding is coming up quickly and there's no time to contact a famous designer for a custom dress, do you have a favorite wedding gown style in mind? If not, I'll make the arrangements directly." Juliet recalled a wedding dress she had seen in a magazine before. "Yes, I'll go take a look tomorrow." "All right," Kane responded. "Let me know if you need anything at all." The next day, Juliet went straight to the renowned designer's studio. The studio was spacious, and on the first floor, right in the center, her favorite wedding dress was displayed prominently. As she walked over, the staff had just taken the dress down at her request. Suddenly, a voice came from the entrance. "Rain. I picked out a few designs yesterday, help me choose carefully today." Juliet turned her head to see Rain and Lauren walking in. She frowned slightly, cursing under her breath about the irony of crossing paths. Meanwhile, Rain instantly wiped the smile off his face when he looked over. "The esteemed eldest daughter of the Mortimer family has stooped to stalking now." He then chuckled mockingly to himself. "Then again, you were always fond of prying into my schedule back then." Hearing this, Juliet interrupted, quite confident, "Aren't you? If you don't have brains, at least you have eyes. Can't you see I was here first?" Rain froze. Juliet set her bag aside to try on the wedding dress when a crimson invitation slipped out. Rain's pupils contracted as she instinctively pressed, "What's this?" Juliet glanced over. "You from the Rain family must be too busy to attend my bridal banquet, so I won't waste an invitation." Rain opened the invitation and saw the same date as his wedding day. His expression darkening slightly. "Quite the convincing fake. You're not still fantasizing about me suddenly reconciling with you on my wedding day, are you?" With that, he tore the invitation in half and tossed it into the nearby trash bin. Then he said to the woman beside him, "Lauren, don't mind her. You go ahead and pick your wedding dress first." Juliet couldn't be bothered with him and hugged the wedding dress, wanting to try it on, but Lauren called out to stop her. "Wait, Miss Juliet. I had my eye on that wedding dress yesterday. Could you give it to me? I know you're upset that I'm marrying Rain, but there's no need to be so hostile and compete with me over everything," Juliet said coldly. "But when I asked yesterday, the staff clearly said no one had reserved it." Before she could finish, Rain snatched the wedding dress from her arms. She stumbled from the sudden pull and fell onto the wide skirt. Rain looked down at her from above. "Juliet, haven't you caused enough trouble? You'll never get married anyway, so what's the point of trying?" Juliet clenched her hands on the wedding dress, then gradually loosened her grip. In Rain's eyes, she had already become this image, a cheap, hysterical woman who wouldn't stop pestering him. At this thought, it felt like a heavy punch to her heart, the web-like cracks slowly spreading wider. "The pain was nothing compared to what I felt the day I returned home," suppressing that bitterness. Juliet lowered her eyes and released her grip. "Take it if you want." Rain was stunned. "What are you doing?" His voice carried an unconscious panic. No one understood better than him Juliet's relentless nature. Once she set her sights on something, she would never let it go. Juliet stood up, glancing at the snow-white wedding dress on the floor. How ugly. With so many dresses to choose from, why insist on snatching this one? She let out a soft, low laugh after speaking. Without even looking at Rain, she turned and walked straight out of the bridal shop. Standing by the roadside, she dialed Kane's number. Her voice sounded muffled. "Didn't find one I liked. That wedding dress from earlier, she used to really love it. But just now, holding it in her hands, she no longer felt that same eager excitement from before. She suddenly remembered that when she first fell in love with that wedding dress, she was sitting beside Rain and had even pointed it out to Rain. Perhaps her fondness for it back then was merely built on the fantasy of walking toward Rain while wearing it. Now, as she gradually lets go of Rain, this wedding dress is no longer her only choice. Kane's deep voice came through. It's all right, I'm already prepared. Just a moment. Within 2 seconds, Juliet's phone vibrated. The voice on the other end continued. I'll send you 2 sets, and you can choose one. Juliet was momentarily stunned, then clicked open the folder he'd sent via WeChat. There were 2 wedding dresses. One was a vintage piece once worn by a famously charitable European queen renowned for her lifelong love with the king, which had previously fetched a sky-high price at auction. There's another set, the final masterpiece of an international wedding dress designer, countless women's dream gown, worth millions. Juliet looked at it, and suddenly all the restlessness and gloom in her heart dissipated like the wind. You choose, she said after some thought. Send me your uncle and aunt's preferences too, so I can prepare the meeting gifts early. There seemed to be a chuckle from the other end. All right, Juliet asked again. When are you coming over? Kane said. I'm abroad negotiating a collaboration. I won't arrive in City N until the day of the bridal banquet. Juliet replied. All right. After hanging up, the familiar scent of tobacco suddenly reached her nose. She turned her head and saw Rain standing at the shop entrance watching her, the familiar brand of cigarette dangling from his lips. He asked in a low voice, who are you talking to? The smoke blurred his features. Juliet couldn't make out his expression. She replied coolly, my future husband. The calm tone made Rain pause, that strange feeling surging up in his heart again. He hated this feeling and immediately scoffed, addicted to acting. Old habits die hard. Then, he stubbed out his cigarette and turned back into the wedding dress shop. In the following days, Juliet stayed peacefully at home preparing for marriage, no longer going out. Meanwhile, Mr. Mortimer and Mrs. Mortimer were also busy, with only one daughter, Juliet. They had decided to relocate their business from City N to the north, planning to settle down permanently in City H to accompany Juliet. On the eve of the bridal banquet, Lucy and a few close girlfriends organized a gathering at an upscale club. Midway through, she stepped out to the restroom. On her way back, she passed by a private room. The door of the room was slightly ajar, and at first glance, she could see Rain sitting there with a somber expression. Juliet paused instinctively. A teasing voice came from inside. Rain, you're getting married tomorrow. Why are you still calling us out for drinks? Something bothering you? What do you know? Sister-in-law is pregnant. Brother Benson must be pretty frustrated lately. Rain didn't respond. At this moment, a scantily dressed woman with seductive makeup boldly approached him. Young Master Benson, shall I keep you company for a drink? As Rain. There had never been a shortage of people throwing themselves at him one after another, but he would usually refuse. In the past it was because of Juliet, now it's because of Lauren. Just when Juliet thought Rain would scold the woman away, Rain smiled and said, what's the fun in drinking like this? He poured the wine into the woman's mouth and then kissed those crimson lips. Juliet suddenly felt the resentment that had been festering in her heart vanish in an instant, leaving only disgust behind. So, this person had been rotten from the very beginning. Just as she was about to leave, Rain turned his head to look at her. Our eyes met. He pushed the woman off him. Juliet, why won't you give up? You actually chased me here. He arrogantly pointed at the full bottle of foreign liquor before him. Since you're so infatuated, if you finish this bottle, I'll give you a chance to be my lover. Juliet initially thought about entering and pouring that bottle over his head, but after consideration, decided it wasn't worth it. Doing this might lead to rumors tomorrow that she turned crazy out of love, becoming mentally unstable and acting out everywhere because she couldn't have Rain. She really didn't want her name to be entangled with this person any longer. She gave a faint glance and walked away, but she had barely taken a few steps when her wrist was grabbed, instantly pulling her into the nearby emergency stairwell. Rain lowered his gaze to look at her, his eyes brewing like a gathering storm. Juliet, what was that look in your eyes just now? His calloused fingertips pressed tightly against the inside of her wrist, sending a shiver through her that made Juliet feel physically nauseous. She shook off Rain, taking a moment to suppress the wave of discomfort. Rain, could you stop being so presumptuous for once? She said impatiently. I'll say it one last time, I'm getting married. From now on, let's act like we don't know each other. Rain clearly didn't believe her. He sneered as he grabbed her hand, violently yanking off her wristwatch and smashing it onto the ground. The hideous scar lay exposed under the dim, icy lighting of the corridor. You'd even resort to suicide just to force me into marriage. How could you possibly marry someone else? Juliet's hand was scratched by the hard steel watchband, drawing faint blood. For the first time, The pain of the wound outweighed the pain in her heart. She looked up, and the expression on Rain's face was exactly the same as when she had forced him into marriage a year ago. She smiled. "Why won't you believe that I really don't love you anymore, Rain? I sincerely wish you a happy marriage." Before she could finish, the man buried his head and kissed her roughly. Juliet felt her stomach churn. She bit down hard, the metallic taste of blood flooding her mouth. Rain recoiled in pain, his lips bleeding as crimson fury burned in his eyes. "Are you insane?" Juliet wiped her lips forcefully, her brows tightly knitted. "Don't touch me. I find it disgusting." With that, she pushed open the emergency exit door and walked out. Meanwhile, Rain stood frozen in place, his eyes filled with disbelief. As soon as she exited the emergency stairwell, Juliet immediately bumped into Lucy, who had come looking for her. Lucy glanced at the emergency exit door with concern. "Juliet, what did Rain want with you? He's not changing his mind about getting back together, is he?" Juliet was silent for a moment. "No," Lucy let out a relieved sigh. "Good, I thought he might have heard you're really getting married and come to make a scene." She linked arms with Juliet as they walked out. "Let's go back and keep drinking. Honestly, I never expected your fiancé would be Kane. Girl, you're really eating well." That night after returning home, Juliet dreamed all night long. One moment it was Rain staging an artificial meteor shower to celebrate her birthday. The next moment, Rain had his arm around Lauren, glaring coldly at her. In the end, all these scenes shattered like mirrors, Rain completely vanishing from her dreams. When she woke again, Juliet still had dried tears at the corners of her eyes, yet her heart was more peaceful than ever before. She understood she had truly and completely let go of Rain from her heart. The Mortimer family's bridal send-off banquet was modest, inviting only close friends and relatives, while the main feast was held at City H. Lester's residence. To Juliet's surprise, Kane even brought along that wedding gown once worn by a European princess. Seeing Juliet's gaze, he curled his lips slightly. "I think both outfits suit you perfectly, one to wear in City N, and the other for the occasion in City H." Juliet felt a stir in her heart. "It's too extravagant," Kane said gently. Whether as the eldest daughter of the Mortimer family, Juliet, or as Mrs. Lester Juliet, "You're worth it." Juliet smiled. With a man like this, as long as she didn't beg for love, she could live this life well, couldn't she? The bridal banquet was held at noon, with not many guests in attendance, but all the right people were invited. However, many guests were visibly startled when they saw Kane. For a moment, the crowd buzzed with whispers. "I thought Juliet was just putting on a show of a fake marriage to pressure President Benson into submission. Who knew she'd actually marry Kane?" Before, Rain kept saying Juliet wouldn't be able to marry anyone without him, but now she's not only married, she's landed the most eligible bachelor in the entire country. "Quick, take a picture. Aren't we going to Rain's wedding banquet tonight? We can show it to young Master Benson later." A crowd of onlookers reveled in the drama, their camera flashes lighting up the scene, but Juliet paid no attention to any of it. After the bridal farewell banquet, she followed Kane straight to the airport. The two would take a private jet directly to City H, where the main wedding banquet would be held. As she boarded the plane, Juliet turned back for one last look. The largest screen was broadcasting the live wedding of Rain and Lauren. Since the ceremony hadn't begun yet, their wedding photos kept scrolling on the screen above. Kane noticed her gaze but said nothing, only asking considerately, reluctant to leave. "Even after marrying into City H, you can still visit often." She withdrew her gaze without emotion. "No, I'm just very relieved that she still had a chance to start life anew." An hour later, the plane pierced through the sky. Juliet will never, ever come back again. City N's most luxurious 5-star hotel, the balcony of the lounge. Rain leaned against the white-painted railing, his index finger twitching slightly as a fleck of ash fell from the flickering ember at his fingertips. His best friend Jack, serving as his groomsman today, reminded him, "Rain, the wedding is about to start." Rain's eyes darkened momentarily. "I know." Then he asked casually, "Has the Mortimer family arrived?" Jack froze for a moment, not understanding why he would bring up the Mortimer family at this time, but he still answered, "Juliet's family didn't come. It was her uncle who showed up." Rain's expression visibly darkened, the inexplicable anger in his heart refusing to subside. "She knows her place." He spat out the words coldly, stubbed out his cigarette, and turned to leave without another word. Upon entering the hotel lobby, the small group of people who had been whispering together immediately fell silent at the sight of him, their expressions guilty. But Rain didn't notice, instinctively scanning the bustling crowd with his eyes, not spotting the familiar figure he was searching for. He felt something inside him collapse in an instant. By the time he regained his composure, he realized he had already dialed Juliet's number. The phone fell silent after a series of busy tones. Rain frowned. Before, no matter when, As long as it was his call, Juliet would always answer within 3 seconds. Just as he hesitated whether to call again, Benson's mother walked over. "Why are you still standing here? Child, hurry up, the wedding ceremony is about to begin." Rain suppressed the unease in his heart after all. Coming. The wedding proceeded through all its formalities while his mind was elsewhere. At 9 in the evening, Rain returned to the presidential suite on the hotel's top floor. Lauren had already changed out of her wedding gown into a comfortable silk nightdress. Seeing Rain return, she hurried to embrace him, burying her head in his chest. "Rain, now we're finally husband and wife in every sense." Rain had drunk quite a bit, his eyes now dark and heavy as if they could drip with intensity. He lightly grasped Lauren's wrist, seemingly deaf to her protests, pulling her straight toward the bedroom. Throwing her onto the bed, Rain immediately leaned over her. Pressing down, he plundered without restraint, Lauren nearly suffocating under the weight of his kiss. But she only thought it was because Rain was too happy today. She called his name emotionally, Rain. Rain also sighed softly, "Juliet." Before his voice faded, both of them froze. Lauren clenched her fists in disbelief, yet her face betrayed nothing as she feigned incomprehension. "Rain, what did you say?" Rain was now fully awake. He looked down at Lauren. Her delicate face bare of makeup, radiating vulnerability. He adored her like this. But for some reason tonight, Juliet's face kept floating unbidden into his mind. He pulled away irritably. Something came up suddenly. "Go to sleep first." With that, he turned and left the suite. Lauren watched the door close. Leaving the room in complete silence, a vicious glint flashed in her eyes. Juliet, on the other side, Jack, who had already gone to bed, was summoned to the club by a call from Rain. When he arrived, Rain's phone on the table had just ended a call attempt from Juliet, and in Rain's call history, the entire screen was filled with Juliet's name. Not a single call had connected. Jack found it strange but still suggested, "Want to try using my phone?" Rain looked up at him. He immediately understood and dialed Juliet's number on his own phone. Within seconds, a slightly hoarse male voice came through the speaker. "What do you want with my wife so late at night?" Jack was stunned for a moment. He glanced down at the name on the screen and suddenly remembered today wasn't just the wedding day for Rain and Lauren, but also Juliet's big day. His phone suddenly felt scorching hot in his hand. He glanced at Rain's face, which had turned as dark as the bottom of a pot. I'm looking for Juliet. Can you let her answer the phone?" Whose call is it?" A soft moan suddenly came from the other end. And Rain's hand gripping the wine glass instantly tensed with bulging veins. He had heard that lazily husky voice countless times before. Juliet's voice, he could never mistake it. Immediately afterward, that same hoarse male voice spoke again. "It's nothing. Go back to sleep." Rain snatched the phone from Jack's hand. "Juliet, who is this man beside you?" Unlike his fury, the man on the other end of the line chuckled lazily. "She's already asleep. Whatever it is, we can talk tomorrow." With that, he hung up the phone directly. Rain wanted to call again, but only got the notification that the other party had powered off. Jack looked at the crimson in Rain's eyes. "Rain, you and Juliet." Rain remained silent, just drinking one glass after another. He felt as if his heart was being crushed by a massive mountain, so suffocating that he couldn't even catch his breath. Jack had no idea what was going through his mind and could only try to bring up Lauren to make him feel better. "Rain, tonight is your wedding night with your wife. Won't she be upset that you ran out like this?" Normally, mentioning Lauren would soften Rain's expression. No matter how upset he was, over the past year, all the guys around them had seen how Rain cherished Lauren, holding her close to his heart. But Rain only twitched his brows, his tone laced with impatience. "She has no right to be upset." Jack was stunned for a moment, then remembered how Rain had just called Juliet. Suddenly, it dawned on him. "Rain, you." Before he could finish, Rain abruptly stood up and made to leave. Jack blocked his path. "Where are you going?" Rain darkened his expression. "To find Juliet." Jack didn't move, tapping a few times on his phone. "Take a look at this." The video on the phone showed exactly the scene from Juliet's bridal banquet. Not only that, the marriage alliance between the Mortimer and Lester families had even made it to the trending searches. Rain recalled those strange looks people gave him at the wedding and suddenly understood something. His broad shoulders relaxed slightly as fragments of memories flickered through his mind like scenes from a film. Juliet announced in front of everyone that she was getting married, and then there was that invitation Juliet handed him when she went wedding dress shopping. He had always thought Juliet was using this method to try and reconcile with him, but it had never occurred to him that everything she said was true. He had always thought he no longer had feelings for Juliet, but now that he knew the truth, his heart felt as if it had been suddenly pierced by a sharp object, the pain turning his face pale. "Kane," he gritted out the name through clenched teeth. Jack reached out and patted him on the shoulder. "Rain, Juliet is already married today." Rain looked up at him, his dark pupils flashing with cold intensity. I want to see her. With that said, he directly walked past Jack and headed out. He wanted to ask Juliet, who claimed to love him so much, how she could so easily marry someone else. Jack clicked his tongue in irritation and followed after him uneasily. Early the next morning, Kane had just finished getting ready and came downstairs when the butler said, "Young master." The young master of the Rain family from City N arrived in the early hours and is still waiting outside, saying he wants to see Madam. Kane paused while adjusting his cuffs, his expression unchanged. "Madam is still asleep. Inform her after she wakes up." Yes. After the butler withdrew, Kane ate a few bites of breakfast casually and left from the garage. Rain waited outside the Lester family's gate until noon before Juliet finally emerged. His gaze fell on the ambiguous red mark on her neck. Juliet wore simple loungewear, leaning against the doorway as she coldly stared at Rain outside the door. "What do you want, Rain?" The icy tone made Rain's heart sting. "Let me in." The entitled tone made Juliet laugh. She crossed her arms and shifted to a more comfortable leaning position. "Sorry, my husband doesn't like me letting unfamiliar people in." "Unfamiliar?" Rain stepped forward, but was pulled back by Jack. "We're on someone else's turf, calm down." But Rain, caught up in the heat of the moment, wouldn't listen to Jack. Even as Jack pulled him back, he still showed no sign of restraint. "Why didn't you say we weren't close when you were lying beneath me?" Juliet thought she would feel heartbroken or angry, but now, hearing Rain's crude words, her heart remained as calm as still water. In fact, she even found the mood to smile. "Rain, there's a saying, a decent ex should be as silent as the dead. Now you've married the one you love most. And I've married the man I fancy. Isn't this a happy ending for all? Coming to find me now, is it out of unwillingness to accept it? Or have you completely lost your cool?" Her gaze at him was distant, disdainful. Rain stood frozen in place. At first, he fell for her and pursued her madly precisely because she never fawned over him like other wealthy girls did. He adored her pride and reveled in her unrestrained spirit. But at some point, perhaps as his passion waned, or perhaps because she invested too much in the relationship, he began to feel weighed down by her love. He couldn't understand how things had come to this. Seeing that Rain remained silent, Juliet lost all interest in pressing further. "Butler, please escort this person out, and inform security not to let just anyone in." With that, she turned and walked straight back into the villa. Rain was eventually escorted out of the villa area by security. Jack wanted to comfort him but couldn't find the right words. Finally, he only asked one question. "Are we going back to City N?" Rain still clenched his fists and shook his head at the words. "You go back first. I'm staying here." Jack frowned, disapproving of his decision. "Rain, do you have any idea what you're doing? You're already married to Lauren, so what's the point of coming back to pester Juliet now? Don't forget, your wife is still carrying your child in her womb." Rain's eyes flickered with movement, as if struggling greatly with himself. He said, "I know my limits," meaning he still intended to remain in City H. This was not at all the Rain that Jack knew, but he could only sigh and leave on his own. Meanwhile, Juliet had no idea Rain had stayed behind in City H. Because of her marriage to Kane, several society ladies had sent invitations requesting to meet her, having just arrived in City H. She wasn't familiar with the local power dynamics and had no idea which families were allied with the Lesters. Unable to decide, she directly called Kane and explained the situation. Kane's voice sounded lazy. "Do as you please, go if you want to, ignore it if you don't. With your husband's capabilities, you don't need to bother with these superficial formalities." Juliet froze for a moment, nearly blurting out, "If that's the case, then why did you even agree to this arranged marriage with me?" Fortunately, reason made her swallow those words. All right, since Kane had said so, Juliet wasn't one to maintain superficial relationships, and immediately declined all invitations. Kane had prepared many things for her, but some didn't suit her habits, so she decided to go out for a stroll. What she didn't know was that the moment her car left the Villa district, a black vehicle secretly began following her. Juliet went to the largest shopping mall in City H, without hesitation. She bought everything that caught her fancy. It occurred to her that since she was already married to Kane, who had prepared 2 such expensive wedding dresses for her, she hadn't given him anything in return. She immediately picked out a pair of smoky amethyst cufflinks to give to Kane when she returned home. This shopping spree lasted until dusk. Underground parking lot. Juliet placed several shopping bags on the back seat of the car before noticing a text message Kane had sent her half an hour earlier. "Picking you up for the old house tonight." Perhaps because he hadn't received a reply, he sent another message 10 minutes ago. "Out already, send me your address." Juliet glanced at the time. It was nearly Kane's off-work hours. She guiltily sent her location over. Almost instantly, Kane replied with a message, "Wait for me." Closing the rear car door, Juliet settled into the driver's seat to wait. Turning around, I saw someone standing in front of my car. The underground parking garage was dimly lit, almost gloomy. Rain stood where the light only illuminated the area below his neck. This gave his expression a somewhat somber appearance. "Let's talk," he spoke. Juliet understood him and knew his current state wasn't normal. She silently took a step back. "We have nothing to talk about." Perhaps her retreating movement provoked him, as he took step after step toward Juliet. With each step he advanced, Juliet retreated another, until her back pressed against the wall, leaving her no room to retreat further. Rain stood before her, his right hand braced against the wall, his left gripping Juliet's shoulder. "Do you hate me that much?" Juliet looked up, meeting his pitch-black eyes. She knew very well that he was furious now, his emotions teetering on the edge of explosion. When she didn't respond, his left hand tightened slightly. "Juliet, you've succeeded," he said through gritted teeth. "I admit, I still have feelings for you. Seeing you marry another man, I couldn't stop myself from coming to find you." His breathing grew heavier. "Juliet, come back." Juliet knew she shouldn't laugh at a time like this, but she simply couldn't help it. After she burst into laughter, Rain's expression darkened even further. "Juliet, what do you mean by this? I've already swallowed my pride for you. Don't push your luck. Stop." Juliet pushed against his chest to shove him away, but the difference in their strength was too great. She couldn't budge him. Now, Juliet truly regretted not bringing any self-defense items when she went out. Otherwise, she wouldn't be in such a passive situation. She had indeed learned some basic self-defense moves, but against Rain, her amateurish skills were completely ineffective. She wasn't the type to bow her head. Yet at this moment she had no choice but to yield. "Step back, let's talk properly." Rain lowered his gaze to stare at her. She understood Rain, just as he understood her. After staring at her for 2 seconds, he curled his lips, thinking of running away. Juliet was about to speak when Rain released his right arm encircling her and pinched her chin, forcing her to raise her head. "Juliet, tell me." Kane would think if he knew about our past. The force of his grip was nearly crushing her jaw. She endured the pain. "Sorry to disappoint you, but my husband already knows about our history." Rain darkened his expression. "Then, what if you're involved with me now?" Without waiting for Juliet to react, he directly lowered his head and kissed her. In her daze, Juliet seemed to hear Kane's voice approaching. "Juliet." Juliet's mind went blank for a moment, but her body reacted instinctively. When Rain's lips were just inches away, she bent her leg and kicked upward with all her strength. To dodge, Rain had to release her abruptly. Juliet glanced around, no one in sight, and seized the chance to dash sideways. The underground garage was vast, and at this moment, filled with cars. Before she could run more than a few steps, Rain caught up with her, pinning her against the car hood with an arm around her waist. His voice grew deeper with anger. "Do you hate me this much now? Have you forgotten who promised to love me forever and marry no one else?" Through the thin fabric, Juliet could distinctly feel Rain's calloused fingertips. His palm pressed tightly against her waist. They had used this position countless times in their memories. Juliet felt her stomach churn, nauseated to the point of nearly vomiting. "Rain, let me go." She struggled desperately, but it was all in vain. Rain had already pressed tightly against her. Juliet suddenly felt as if she were enveloped in despair. "Juliet." At that very moment, a voice that brought her comfort rang out. Immediately after, a muffled groan sounded, and the force restraining her loosened. The next second, she was pulled into a warm embrace. Kane gently patted her back. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." So the sound just now wasn't an illusion. Kane had really come for her. He carried a pleasant woody fragrance. Juliet nestled in his arms and gradually calmed down. Kane simply let her hold him like that. After a long while, Juliet finally pulled away from his embrace. "Thank you." She glanced to the other side and saw Rain with a large bruise near his eye, currently restrained by 2 security guards on either side. Kane had struck hard, and now Rain hung his head, completely dazed. Only at this moment Juliet did she feel her heart finally settle. She released her arms from around Kane and asked, "What about him?" Kane had a somewhat cold expression, making him appear aloof. He looked down at her emotionlessly and asked, "How do you want to handle this, if possible?" Juliet would really like to send Rain straight to jail, but would this affect Kane's company? Kane seemed to read her thoughts. It might be a bit difficult in City N, but this is City H. That meant everything could be settled. Juliet felt inexplicably soothed by these words. In this industry, she appeared glamorous, but she'd certainly suffered her share of indignities outside before. Yet when it came to matters affecting the company's interests, she often had no choice but to concede. Her voice brimmed with excitement. "Then let's call the police." Kane with just a glance, the 2 security guards escorted the person away. He shoved Juliet into the car and took the driver's seat himself. "Bring a bodyguard when you go out from now on." His intentions were good, and Juliet had no reason to refuse. Alright, it wasn't until the car left the parking lot that she belatedly realized. Just now Kane came over and saw how much of it would he harbor any resentment in his heart. Thinking this, she opened her mouth. Just now, I was with Rain. She wanted to explain properly but didn't know how to begin. Kane drove with a hint of nonchalance. No need to explain. You're the victim here, there's no reason for you to be blamed. Juliet looked at him, her eyes suddenly stinging with tears. She remembered her time with Rain. It was supposed to be a normal relationship. Yet in the end, all the bad reputation fell solely on her shoulders. She hadn't cared much before. But this sudden surge of bitterness told her she did mind after all. She bit her lip and lowered her head. The next moment, a hand with distinct knuckles appeared before her, holding a tissue. If you want to cry, just let it out. Juliet froze for a moment before looking up at him. She saw Kane staring straight ahead. With no intention of turning to look at her, his interruption actually made her lose the urge to cry. Clutching a tissue, she stared at his profile. The car interior was unlit. The dim light shifting as his expression became inscrutable in the shadows. But one thing was certain, Kane's face was stunning enough to leave anyone breathless. Suddenly, Juliet recalled the white moonlight he had mentioned. She couldn't help but wonder, could there really be someone Kane, so perfect, couldn't win over? Thinking this, she voiced her question aloud. Kane's lips pressed together almost imperceptibly. It was an unrequited love. Juliet didn't believe it. You, with this face, had an unrequited love. Kane let out a breath that might have been a laugh. She had a boyfriend at the time, and now. Juliet finished speaking and immediately felt she had asked too many questions. She paused, then added, if you ever get the chance to be with someone you like, you can tell me directly. I won't stand in your way. Kane didn't respond. It wasn't until the car arrived at Lester's family estate that Kane finally spoke. I'm not Rain. The streetlight outside the old house was bright enough. Kane that when he turned to look at her, half of his face was clearly illuminated. Right now. You are my wife, whether out of duty or anything else. You're the only one who holds that place. The way I was raised taught me not to be someone who changes their heart at the sight of something new. Juliet met his deep, penetrating gaze and, for a moment, found herself at a loss for how to react. Finally, he curled his lips into a smile and flicked her forehead with his finger. Alright, don't overthink it. Mom and Dad have been waiting for us for a long time. Juliet nodded and followed him into the house. The dining table was already set with food. A large portion of it was Juliet's favorite dishes. The family enjoyed a delightful meal together. Kane's mom even served Juliet several helpings of food. After dinner, Kane decided to stay overnight at the old house. Juliet then went out to bring in all the things from the car. When she entered again, she saw Kane's mom's bedroom door open. With Kane inside as well, Kane's mom called out. Juliet's eyes are red. Did you bully her? I'm telling you, now that you're married, you're a grown man. Bullying your wife is unacceptable. Kane replied helplessly, Mom, am I really that unreliable in your eyes? When have you ever been reliable? Kane's mom snapped back, anyway, if I find out you're mistreating Juliet, I won't let you off easy. Juliet never expected Kane's mom to say such things to Kane in private. A warm current instantly flowed through her heart. Suppressing her inner excitement, she returned to the room she shared with Kane. Before long, Kane returned, holding a box in his hand. He walked straight up to Juliet and knelt down on one knee. Juliet was still processing the situation. What are you doing? Kane lowered his eyes, took out an exceptionally fine jade bracelet from the box, and without a word slipped it onto Juliet's wrist. My mother said this is the Lester family heirloom. Today, I'm giving it to you. It's too valuable. Juliet awkwardly averted her gaze, only to notice his ears turning slightly red. She was surprised but chose not to point it out, simply saying, besides, there's no need to kneel so formally. Kane cleared his throat, unconsciously rubbing her wrist with his thumb. Just take it, Mrs. Lester. With that, he stood up to leave. Juliet grabbed his arm. Wait, I have something for you too. Is that so? Kane raised an eyebrow slightly, crossing his arms as he stood to the side. Watching her with leisurely amusement, Juliet rubbed her earlobe and produced a velvet box. Opening it, I saw this at the mall today and thought it suited you, so I bought it. The purple jade reflected light under the lamp. Kane frowned slightly. All the cufflinks he usually wore were without exception black. Yet he still reached out his hand. Help me try it on. Juliet complied. Kane rotated his arm and examined it for quite some time without expressing whether he liked it or not. Only the slight curl at the corner of his lips revealing his current mood. I still have company matters to discuss with Dad. You should sleep first. With that, he strode out of the room. Juliet watched his figure disappear through the doorway, then removed the jade bracelet from her wrist and carefully placed it back in its box. Since the bracelet was Lester family's heirloom, wearing it carelessly outdoors would inevitably lead to scratches. After tidying up, She scrolled through her phone for a while before lying down to sleep. The next time she heard news of Rain was 3 evenings later. Kane came home after a day's work, and his first words were, "Rain has been released from detention." Since Rain didn't actually do anything in the underground garage, he was only detained. Juliet wasn't surprised. After all, Rain's family wouldn't just abandon him. It was only natural for him to be released. Kane walked up to Juliet. His tone no longer as casual as before. Lauren bailed him out. He reached out and ruffled Juliet's hair. "Now that Rain is bothering you, Lauren will only blame you for it. Who knows what tricks she might pull. You should be careful too." Juliet knew exactly what kind of person Lauren was, and understood his concerns weren't unfounded. "All right, I'll be careful." Kane smiled, his expression relaxing again. Rain has made some big moves since coming out. It seems he's aiming to break into City HS Market. Juliet instinctively widened her eyes. "Will this affect you?" Kane looked at her, his fingers slightly curling. Then, he flicked Juliet's forehead with his finger. "You should worry more about yourself." Juliet watched him walk into the bathroom, momentarily dazed. Kane seemed to enjoy flicking her forehead, but he always held back, never using enough force to actually hurt her. His actions were more about showing affection. Yet the time they'd spent together barely added up to much, let alone any emotional foundation. Just as she was thinking, the sound of running water came from the bathroom. Juliet shook her head, dismissing all those thoughts from earlier. For many days after that, Juliet mostly stayed at home, only going out when absolutely necessary. A month passed like this. Juliet occasionally came across news online about the Benson Group entering the City H Market. However, perhaps because Kane was suppressing it, Rain was struggling to make progress. News like this Juliet would just glance at, never taking it to heart. That day, the beauty salon where she had a membership called, saying they had new products and invited her to come try them. Having been feeling bored staying at home these days, she decided to go out. Entering the beauty salon, she went straight to the changing room to get dressed. As soon as she entered, she noticed something odd about the incense in the dressing room. Its scent was different from before. "Look out." She immediately turned to leave, but before reaching the door, a wave of dizziness struck her head. Then, everything went black before her eyes as she collapsed forward, out cold. "Don't worry, I paid a fortune for this drug. She won't get away." "Then hurry up and get her out of here before anyone notices." The unfamiliar voices made Juliet feel dizzy and confused. She tried to struggle, but the drug's effects overpowered her, and she fell into a deep sleep. When I came to again, I was in a pitch-black place. There was an indescribable smell in the air. Juliet tried to move and found herself bound hand and foot, carelessly thrown on the ground. The floor was covered in coarse gravel. It looked like some sort of abandoned factory. As she was thinking of a way to escape, footsteps approached from outside. "Why hasn't that woman come yet? We've already tied the person up. Is she trying to back out of the deal? When I went out to buy cigarettes earlier, I heard police sirens blaring non-stop. No idea what big incident happened. Who cares? Anyway, we'll take the money and leave this place once we get it. That woman asked us to kidnap someone. She won't let us get caught just like that." Footsteps stopped at the door. Juliet kept her eyes closed, though her head remained groggy from the medication. She had mostly pieced together her current predicament. She couldn't claim to have been a complete saint in her life, having been spoiled and domineering, but in truth, she'd never truly crossed anyone. If there was one woman who held a grudge against her, it could only be Lauren. She had been feeling panicked. But upon hearing the kidnappers outside mention police sirens, her worries eased somewhat. Kane must have already realized she was missing, though she didn't know how long she'd been gone. She was certain Kane would find her soon. There was no particular reason, she simply trusted in his capabilities. With these thoughts, Juliet completely relaxed and began conserving her energy. As time passed, the sunlight seeping through the gaps in the cloth-covered windows grew fainter, and the sky outside darkened. There was movement outside again. The two men guarding this side exchanged a few words, then lighter footsteps entered. The beam of a flashlight swept across the entire room before finally settling on Juliet. Juliet closed her eyes briefly, waiting until they adjusted to the light before looking up. Even against the glare, she could be certain the person approaching was Lauren. Lauren stepped closer to Juliet, reaching out to tear the tape from her mouth. The sharp pain made Juliet gasp. "Juliet, so you've fallen into my hands at last." Juliet leaned against the cold wall and said unhurriedly, "Lauren, what you're doing is illegal." Lauren laughed. "With Rain backing me, what do I have to fear?" Juliet looked up at her. In the beam of the flashlight, the air was thick with floating dust. Lauren's face wasn't that clear, but Juliet could imagine her smug expression at this moment. Yet, Juliet couldn't figure out where Lauren got such overwhelming confidence. Could it be that Lauren truly believed Rain could defy the law and manipulate everything with impunity? She also laughed. "Lauren, This isn't a novel or a romantic drama. Whatever you do will leave traces. Besides, this is in City H, where Rain doesn't have that much influence. Juliet believed she was stating facts, but Lauren suddenly barked like a dog whose tail had been stepped on. Shut up. She gripped Juliet's chin, her sharp nails digging into Juliet's flesh. You're just a discarded shoe abandoned by Rain. How dare you still live so well, while no matter what I want, I have to fight tooth and nail for it myself. After all these years of groveling, why is it that even after you married someone else, Rain still can't forget you? She growled under her breath, suddenly pulling out a dagger and thrusting it toward Juliet. The light reflecting off the dagger's blade momentarily blinded Juliet, but she still instinctively dodged to the side and kicked out with her leg, though her half-baked martial arts skills were no match for Rain. She was somewhat confident in dealing with Lauren. She didn't know where she had just kicked Lauren, but she heard Lauren let out a scream, and the flashlight was flung away. As the light dimmed, Juliet could no longer see anything. My stomach, Lauren's pained voice reached her, and Juliet remembered she was pregnant. However, Juliet didn't feel the slightest bit guilty. Lauren had brought this entirely upon herself, hearing the commotion inside. The man outside couldn't sit still any longer and blurted out, "Mrs. Benson, what's happened?" But Lauren was now in such pain that her voice was too weak to answer them. Just as they were about to push the door open, several shadows flashed by and quickly pinned them to the ground. Miss Juliet. In the next moment, a series of police officers rushed in, their powerful flashlights illuminating the entire room as bright as daylight. Juliet instinctively closed her eyes. Juliet. The familiar voice carried urgency, and the next moment, she was pulled into a tight embrace. Kane, she called out softly, I'm here." His voice carried no emotion, sounding as if he was angry. Juliet opened her eyes, now adjusted to the light, and could clearly see Kane's appearance. He was frowning tightly, his lips pressed together. As he bent his head to untie the ropes binding her hands, she looked up to see another person entering through the doorway. Rain strode over with large steps. Juliet turned her head and buried her face in Kane's chest, showing no intention of speaking to him. Lauren huddled to the side, seeing Rain head straight for Juliet. She was seething with hatred, but right now her stomach hurt too much to make a scene. "Rain, save me, save our child." At this moment, Rain seemed to snap out of his daze. Turning his head, he saw the pool of blood beneath Lauren and turned pale, even though he was currently entangled with Juliet. He had never considered abandoning Lauren. He immediately picked her up. "I'll take you to the hospital right now." With that, he hurriedly ran out. The police officers present didn't stop them, only assigning 2 officers to follow and keep an eye on them. Juliet was taken to give a preliminary statement first. She recounted everything that had happened to her exactly as it occurred. By the time she came out of the interrogation room, over an hour had already passed. Kane stood there with an expressionless face, but the indifference in his gaze made it clear he was in a bad mood. Behind him stood 2 bodyguards. They were the same 2 Juliet had taken with her when she went to the beauty salon. Their lowered heads made it obvious they'd been Kane's targets of reprimand. Juliet walked over and gently tugged at Kane's sleeve. "Did you scold them?" The 2 bodyguards hung their heads even lower. Kane glanced at her sideways. "They didn't do their job properly." "Serves them right." Juliet shook his arm. "You can't entirely blame them. They couldn't exactly follow me into the changing room, could they? Besides, the beauty salon only has female clients. It wouldn't be appropriate for them to tag along. She was the one who made them wait outside. So she bore some responsibility too." Seeing Kane didn't refute, she added, "It's nothing serious on my end, just consider it a lesson learned. Please don't fire them." Unexpectedly, Kane furrowed his brows, looking even more displeased. He lowered his eyes, somewhat gritting his teeth. "You think I'm being unreasonable by firing them?" Juliet shrank her neck slightly, feeling somewhat guilty. Rain would definitely do that, but judging by Kane's temper, he probably wouldn't. She opened her mouth, unsure of what to say, and finally offered an ingratiating smile. Kane tutted, "Though Madam has pleaded for you, your bonuses this month will still be deducted. Starting today, return to your original posts." The 2 bodyguards acknowledged and left. Kane then turned to Juliet. "It was my oversight. I'll recruit some female bodyguards to protect you as soon as possible." This was the first time Juliet had seen him speak so seriously since she'd known him. She turned her head uncomfortably. "All right, let's go home." But Kane didn't take her home directly. Instead, he drove her to Lester's private hospital. Juliet thought he was making a fuss. "It's so late, and I'm barely hurt. Do we really need to come to the hospital?" Kane handed her over to the doctor without room for argument. "Be good. I'll feel better after you get checked." Seeing his insistence, Juliet had no choice but to obediently undergo a full set of examinations. The most obvious injuries were the abrasions on her arms, back, and calves. As for the rest of the test results, Even with expedited processing, they wouldn't be available until tomorrow. In the end, Kane secured a private hospital room to administer medication to Juliet. Juliet watched him tear open the medicine packaging. For Mr. Kane to condescend and personally apply my medicine, I must be the luckiest person alive. Kane lifted his eyelids to glance at her, then pressed the medicated cotton swab firmly against her wound. Juliet immediately grimaced in pain. Ouch. Kane, you're getting back at me. The corner of his mouth twitched as he replied indifferently, these hands have never done manual labor, they don't know their own strength. You'll have to bear with me, Miss Juliet. TMPH, so sarcastic. Juliet pursed her lips and said nothing more. Kane didn't retort either, and the pressure from his hands lightened considerably. By the time he finished applying medicine to the wound on her back, she had already fallen asleep on the hospital bed. Kane looked at her like this, used his finger to brush aside the hair covering half her face, and smiled silently. That night, Kane slept in this single hospital room while holding Juliet in his arms. By the time they woke up the next morning, the test results from Juliet's examinations the previous night had come in. Residual sevoflurane was detected in Miss Juliet's system. But this drug can be metabolized by the human body. Other than that, there are no other issues. Kane uneasily flipped through the report several times before his tense expression finally relaxed. Juliet felt a slight flutter in her heart as she sensed his concern. After the doctor left, she couldn't help but ask, Mr. Kane, you care about me this much? Kane didn't deny it and responded with an open-hearted This left Juliet stunned. He reached for Juliet's hand again. Let's go. After all this commotion tonight, you must be hungry. The two walked out of the hospital room. They hadn't gone far when they happened to see two police officers emerging from another ward. Juliet peeked in and was shocked to find the pale-faced Lauren lying in the hospital bed. The two officers recognized Juliet and Kane. One of them said, the suspect survived emergency treatment last night. The baby was saved. We just finished taking her statement. Juliet nodded. Good work. After they left, she remarked with a sigh, she's tough. Last night she had seen it with her own eyes. Lauren was lying in so much blood it was terrifying. Who would have thought the child could pull through after all that? Kane opened his mouth to say something, but then Rain stepped out of the hospital room. Lauren also spotted Juliet standing in the hallway, and immediately became agitated. Juliet, you vicious woman, I'll sue you for intentionally harming my child. Juliet let out a cold laugh. That was self-defense. If anyone's filing a lawsuit, it should be me against you. Ah, Juliet you. Lauren's remaining words were cut off as Rain closed the door behind her, leaving only indistinct murmurs. Having likely stood guard all night, his unshaven chin bore stubble, giving him an overall disheveled appearance. Juliet had only glanced over when she suddenly felt an arm drape across her shoulders. She turned her head to see Kane gazing at her with profound intensity. His head slightly tilted. Well then, this man's possessiveness runs rather deep. Rain watched their silent exchange, a suffocating pressure building in his chest as if ready to explode. He pressed his lips tightly together and spoke hoarsely. Juliet, let's talk. After a pause, as if anticipating her refusal, he added, about how Lauren hurt you, meaning, he wanted to settle this privately. Ignoring Kane's already furrowed brows, Juliet nodded, all right. Kane's thin lips instantly pressed into a straight line, his expression growing even more indifferent, but he didn't undermine Juliet either. I'll choose the place. Kane chose a hotel very close to the hospital. Juliet and the other two arrived to find the private dining room already set with dishes. Kane pulled out a chair for her. Eat something first. We'll talk after. Having said that, he unhurriedly began serving her dishes. Juliet was in no rush either, starting to eat with slow, deliberate bites. Compared to their relaxed demeanor, Rain remained distracted throughout the entire meal. He was already worried about Lauren, and seeing Juliet and Kane being all lovey-dovey in front of him made his heart feel as bitter as swallowing coptis root, chewing wax with no flavor. Rain watched as Juliet put down her chopsticks and immediately said, Juliet, this time, could you let Lauren go? She still carries my child in her womb. Juliet wiped her fingers clean one by one before lifting her gaze to meet the person across from her. Rain, what gives you the right to say such things to me? I was nearly stabbed to death by Lauren. That knife is still at the police station. Why should I spare someone who almost killed me? Kane twitched his eyelids but refrained from interjecting. Rain was momentarily dazed. He couldn't remember how long it had been since he'd seen such a stern and vivid Juliet. His heart swelled like a balloon, and his pulse quickened slightly. It wasn't until Kane cleared his throat pointedly that he snapped out of it. Across the way, Juliet's expression had turned to disgust. Rain felt like a rapidly inflating balloon suddenly punctured by a needle, deflating at breakneck speed. He lowered his head, avoiding Kane's scornful gaze. You can make any request, as long as it's within my power to fulfill, Juliet said solemnly. Very well, I have two conditions. If you agree to them, I'll forgive Lauren this time. First, you withdraw from the project you're competing for against the Lester family. Rain's expression changed dramatically. He wanted to refuse. He needed this project to establish his footing in City H. Seeing Juliet's resolute expression, he knew there was no room for negotiation. His throat felt clogged, but he still spoke. Fine. Losing this project wouldn't be the end, there would always be another. He believed in his own abilities. Juliet added, second, I want you to never bother me again. Rain paused slightly in expression. He looked at Juliet, his gaze like a searchlight, as if trying to detect any discrepancy between her words and her micro-expressions, but there was none. On her face was only impatience at sharing the same space with him. He endured the sharp pain in his chest, lowered his head in thought for a long while, then finally nodded. All right. From the very beginning, Juliet had already planned these two demands. Now that her goal was achieved, she didn't want to stay a moment longer. It's settled then. Once the project details are confirmed, I'll withdraw the case. With that, she immediately took Kane by the arm and left. On the way home, Kane remained silent, though he showed nothing on his face. Juliet could clearly sense he was sulking. She softened her tone. Is Mr. Kane angry? Kane said nothing. Juliet called out softly again. Kane. Kane finally spoke. Do you still have feelings for him? Juliet gasped. Why would you say that? Otherwise, why would you drop the case? This time, putting Lauren away would solve the problem once and for all. Juliet inexplicably detected a tone of resentment in his voice. So he thought she agreed to withdraw the case because she still couldn't let go of Rain. Then why did she bring up those two conditions? She glanced at his head and answered truthfully. But Lauren is currently pregnant. How much punishment could she possibly receive? Even if we send her in, with Rain's capabilities, he could make her life comfortable there. It's better to use her to gain more benefits for us. You've been busy with that project lately, and I want to help you too. Though I'm not as capable as you, I do understand this area somewhat. Rain has practically invested his entire fortune into this project. To secure it, you'd need to invest even more, but then the input wouldn't be proportional to the returns. This is where Rain differs from you. He needs an achievement to establish himself, but what you want is greater profits, isn't it? The car came to a stop. Juliet continued. Kane, I'm not a child. In fact, from my perspective, tangible benefits matter more. Having been hurt by emotions once before, she no longer placed such useless things on a pedestal. Not to mention, she didn't even harbor resentment toward Rain anymore. How could there possibly be any other feelings? Kane tightened his grip on the steering wheel. After a long silence, he exhaled sharply. Do whatever you want. He was genuinely happy that she could consider his feelings, yet her final words left him feeling somewhat deflated. But there wasn't much he could do about her either. With that, he opened the car door and stepped out. Juliet followed him out of the car and saw him head straight into the house without any intention of going to the office. She couldn't help but ask, aren't you going to work today? Kane turned back to look at her helplessly. You've had a shock. I'll stay home with you today. His tone had returned to that unhurried drawl, and his gaze held a casual indifference as he looked at her. At this moment, Juliet couldn't quite put her finger on what she was feeling inside. My heart is beating a little too fast, with a tingling sensation like electric currents running through it. Seeing her standing still, Kane raised an eyebrow. So, Mrs. Lester, what would you like me to do with you today? Juliet quickly ran through countless thoughts in her mind before settling on the most conventional option. How about watching a movie and going shopping? Kane didn't refuse. Let's take a shower and then we'll go. With that, Juliet headed straight into the bathroom. By the time she came out, Kane had already finished packing and changed into casual clothes. Hanging haphazardly on the nearby clothes rack were the shirt and suit he'd changed out of. Juliet lowered her gaze and spotted the smoky amethyst cufflinks at his sleeve. She touched her chin in thought. Hadn't Kane been wearing this same pair of cufflinks all these days? Just as she pondered, Kane's voice sounded at the doorway. What are you looking at? Juliet didn't hesitate and asked directly. Haven't you changed these cufflinks at all? Kane crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. Yeah, Mrs. Lester bought me just this pair. How could I bear to change them? Did his words mean what she thought they meant? Juliet blinked. Then I'll pick out a few more pairs for you later. Kane curved his lips, pressing his advantage. Not enough. Juliet suddenly grasped his meaning and declared generously. Then I'll get you a complete set, ties, suits, the whole works. Kane lowered his eyes, his gaze shimmering like starlight. Then my thanks to Mrs. Lester. In the end, Juliet kept her promise. Practically replacing every piece of clothing in Kane's wardrobe, Kane also kept his word, spending the entire day with Juliet just like an ordinary couple would. But that was only for one day. After that, Juliet returned to her previous life of staying home alone. She did get to know a few people in the circle, But it was either forming mahjong games with older ladies or going out with young socialites. Those she met as Kane's wife ultimately lacked sincerity, and even when gathering, there was much less enjoyment. Gradually, Juliet also found it boring and rarely accepted invitations anymore. But staying at home is also boring. Even though they only met at night, Kane still noticed, that night. Kane had just finished toying with her and pulled her into his arms. "The butler told me you've been staying home every day recently." Juliet didn't have much energy left, but still responded, Kane twirled a strand of her hair around his finger. "I heard you majored in design in college. Why not open a studio? That should keep things interesting." "No." Hearing this proposal, Juliet perked up a little. "A studio, right." Juliet nestled in his arms with her eyes closed. Thinking hesitantly, "Can I really do it? What if I end up achieving nothing at all?" She did major in fashion design in college, which was also her passion, but after graduation, because of her entanglement with Rain, she hadn't picked up a pencil in a long time. Back then, Rain always said that men should work outside while women manage the household. If she wanted to be with him, she should take care of the logistics and look after him well. Most wives in this circle lived exactly like that, so she obediently followed suit. Now, Kane brought up the topic again, and only then did she remember her former dream to become an internationally renowned designer. At this thought, Juliet felt all traces of drowsiness vanish. Kane gently pinched the soft flesh of her cheek. "If you want to do it, then be bold, even if you fail." "It's nothing, I've got your back." Juliet shot him an annoyed glare. "You make it sound like you're my sugar daddy." Kane choked slightly. "That could be arranged." He spoke while lowering his head to capture her lips again. Then, once more, Juliet was almost immediately led to forget Kane's earlier suggestion. By the end of the night, she was practically exhausted into sleep, yet when she woke the next morning, she hadn't dismissed the studio matters they discussed the previous night and began making preparations accordingly. Kane wasn't just paying lip service when he said he'd support her, he proactively assigned some of his most capable staff to assist her. Soon, her studio was up and running. Kane even leveraged his connections to introduce numerous clients to her. Just as the studio was flourishing, an unexpected visitor arrived. Juliet eyed the person being led into the reception room by the front desk, raising a brow slightly. "Mrs. Benson, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Though she addressed her as Mrs. Benson, Lauren detected no trace of respect in her tone. Lauren felt a flash of jealousy in her eyes. She settled onto the leather sofa opposite Juliet, her belly protruding, a smile playing on her lips. "I must say, I'm quite envious. Your studio has flourished so well, Mr. Kane must have given you quite a bit of help." "No." With loving eyes, she gently touched her belly. "But fortunately, Rain treats me very well, always accommodating, and recently has prepared many things for my baby." Juliet looked at her with a forced smile and remained silent. If her life was truly as good as she claimed, why would she suddenly show up here? No one took the bait. Lauren, her eyes burning with even stronger jealousy, yet she continued smiling. "Oh, why am I telling you all this? I came to ask you to make a dress for me. Though I'm only 4 months pregnant and it's still early, I'd like to order a chipao to wear at my baby's 100-day celebration." The receptionist happened to enter with water at that moment. Juliet raised her hand. "Lester Young, take the water away. We don't do business with the Rain family." Lester Young froze for a moment, giving Lauren a once-over. Though puzzled about why Juliet would do this, she still nodded and retreated with the water. Lauren contorted her face. "Juliet, what do you mean by that? I came here in good faith to do business with you, to bring you money, and this is how you insult me." Juliet couldn't help but laugh. "Still don't get it. I'm afraid if you drink water here, and then something happens to your child at home, you'll blame it on me. Not only that, I simply dislike you, and I certainly don't want to design any cheongsam for you. Perhaps I should remind you that last time you kidnapped me, it was Rain who made significant concessions to protect you. If you provoke my displeasure again, I can absolutely file another lawsuit against you. After all, I've kept all that evidence carefully preserved." Lauren instantly turned pale. She took several deep breaths before barely managing to suppress the fury in her heart. It was precisely because of this incident that Rain held so much resentment toward her, but she refused to bow her head before Juliet. "Since Rain is willing to sacrifice so much for me, it must leave a bitter taste in your mouth, doesn't it, Juliet? I managed to snatch Rain away from you, and I won't lose to you in the future either. Just you wait." Juliet simply watched as she spouted these harsh words before turning and leaving in a huff. She thought the matter was over, but that very night, as soon as she stepped through her front door upon returning home, she received a call from an unknown number. Since it was her work number, she answered the call directly. The next moment, Rain's furious voice came through. "Juliet, what on earth did you do to Lauren?" As expected, Lauren couldn't be relied upon for much. Juliet sighed deeply. "What did I do this time? How should I know what you did? Lauren only went to see you today, and came back feeling unwell. Now she's still lying in the hospital. How dare you claim you did nothing? Juliet rolled her eyes hard. Then she directly sent over all the surveillance footage from today when Lauren visited the studio. I thought after what happened last time, you'd finally understand what kind of person Lauren is. Yet you still take her word at face value. Rain, how did I never realize you could be this foolish before? There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Juliet ignored whether he was watching the surveillance footage and finally said, "Don't forget what you promised me. If you can't keep an eye on Lauren, I wouldn't mind teaching her a lesson for you." With that, she hung up directly and then blocked Rain on her work phone as well. She saw Rain again at the engagement party of a certain socialite in their circle. Juliet attended the banquet as a wedding dress designer for the heiress. Although he lost that project, as time passed, Rain managed to gain a small foothold in City H. But even so, City H was exclusionary, unlike the Mortimer family protected by Kane. And he still struggled at every step. Juliet spotted Rain standing alone in a corner of the banquet hall, surrounded only by a few other young talents who had just made their mark in City HS business circle. City HS social circles have always been this way. If the younger generation can't break into existing groups, they have no choice but to form their own clusters for warmth. But City N bred Rain, who grew up pampered with smooth sailing, clearly doesn't understand this law of survival. When several young men intentionally tried to befriend him, he simply walked away with his drink in hand. Juliet watched this scene unfold before calmly turning to find herself a seat. It was still early, and she quietly listened to the surrounding ladies discussing the latest trends, until, half an hour before the engagement banquet began, a commotion arose at the entrance of the hall. It's human nature to enjoy a spectacle. Juliet followed a few of the ladies nearby. Subtly making her way toward the disturbance, her eyes lit up slightly as soon as she reached the door. Who else could be struggling here if not Lauren and Rain? Lauren's belly was already quite large. At that moment, she was wearing a loose white dress, with teardrops hanging precariously from her eyelashes, and Rain stood nearby, his face as grim as could be, with several scratch marks visible on his neck. The two stood in a stalemate, neither willing to back down. Juliet couldn't help but ask someone nearby, "What's going on?" Someone immediately whispered to her, "It's that woman." She showed up without an invitation, demanding to see Rain, claiming to be Mrs. Benson. The doorman only called Rain out to verify her identity because she's pregnant. Rain came out, and this woman had the audacity to rush up and ask if Rain had another woman on the side. Another person spoke disdainfully. "This woman is utterly foolish. In this circle, keeping mistresses is commonplace. Who doesn't handle such matters behind closed doors? Yet she makes a scene in public, not only humiliating herself but also ensuring no one would dare work with a man who can't even control his own woman." As they spoke, both men and women around them snickered under their breath. Juliet had come to watch Rain and Lauren's drama, but hearing these words, she couldn't help feeling uneasy. She was once proud and radiant, a believer in love, even though she knew the rules of this world. It was only after being hurt once by Rain that she changed her mind. In this world, benefits are enough. That's why she could calmly say to Kane that she didn't care about his private life and could even play along with his act. Probably after getting married, Kane treated her like a loving couple, making her forget their relationship was merely an arranged marriage. No one could ever truly know what was going through the mind of Kane, who grew up in the elite circles of high society. Just as the thought crossed my mind, an arm suddenly draped over my shoulders, instantly enveloping me in the familiar scent of sandalwood. "What's wrong?" Kane asked quietly. Juliet didn't answer but instead asked, "I thought you didn't like attending these kinds of banquets. When did you arrive?" Kane slightly lowered his head, a strand of his usually immaculately styled hair falling loose, softening much of his aloof demeanor. "Today I didn't come as Kane, but as designer Juliet's husband. I just arrived too." Seeing everyone gathered here, "I came over to take a look." He didn't like crowds, but came over simply because he thought she might be here. For some reason, Juliet felt that uncomfortable sensation in her heart fade considerably. Her eyes curved into crescents. Juliet's husband, Kane's gaze darkened. "Mrs. Lester." The two exchanged glances, each curling their lips into a smile. Lauren, who had been locked in a stalemate until now, spoke up again. "Why won't you say anything? Rain, don't forget I'm carrying your child. How can you treat me like this?" Rain simply wiped the blood seeping from the wound on his neck with a tissue, remaining silent. His indifferent attitude only made Lauren grow increasingly frantic. Ever since the night she married Rain, he hadn't been as obedient to her as before. When she learned from Jack that Rain had actually abandoned her to go to City H to find Juliet, she was furious and immediately set off to follow him. But after arriving in City H, she discovered that Rain had actually been sent to the police station for harassing Juliet. She had to contact Rain's mother to bail him out, and was even scolded by her for failing to control her man. She thought that after suffering such unfair treatment for no reason, Rain would at least comfort her properly. In reality, Rain did comfort her, but she could sense his lack of sincerity. Later, she even frequently heard him calling Juliet's name in his sleep. She was terrified. She knew all too well how much Rain had once adored Juliet, and that she had only managed to steal his heart through cunning means. Every day since then, she had lived in fear that Rain would return to Juliet, and now, her worst nightmare had come true. She couldn't help but think that without Juliet, she would never have to worry like this again, and so she thought, and so she acted, but she never imagined the truth would come to light, causing Rain to become completely estranged from her. If not for the child in her womb, Rain wouldn't have spared her another glance. During those days, she lowered her pride, accommodating him and coaxing him, barely managing to bring about some change, but while helping him tidy his study. She stumbled upon photos of Juliet he had secretly taken. It was only then that she learned Juliet was now the owner of a studio. Juliet was doing so well. Rain clearly still had feelings for her. Lauren, fearing her position as Mrs. Benson might be threatened, couldn't wait to pay Juliet a visit. Her original intention was to give Juliet a warning, to make Juliet know her place and stop fantasizing about Rain, but she never expected that Juliet wouldn't even regard her as worthy of attention. Even going so far as to insult her. After returning home, she couldn't resist the urge to frame Juliet. Clearly, Rain still cared about her, but after just one phone call with Juliet, Rain's attitude changed again. He became even colder than before. She apologized and admitted her mistakes, but it was all in vain. Recently, she also noticed that Rain was frequently coming home late, carrying the scent of unfamiliar perfume. Upon investigating, she discovered that Rain was actually keeping another woman outside. Today, photos of that woman were delivered to her. That woman's eyes and brows looked strikingly similar to Juliet. In a fit of impulsiveness, she stormed right over here, but Rain's attitude was like pouring a bucket of cold water over her head, chilling her from head to toe. Lauren trembled, her lips quivering as she couldn't help but step forward to grapple with Rain. Rain, how could you do this to me? But the waiter nearby blocked her movement. Here, Rain crumpled the tissue in his hand into a ball, then raised his eyes to look at Lauren, his gaze now filled with nothing but endless coldness. Once the child is born, get out of the Rain family. With that, he turned and walked straight into the banquet hall. Lauren's face instantly turned pale. She wanted to say more, but the waiter, acting on Rain's orders, drove her out. Originally, with Juliet's height, she wouldn't stand out in a crowd. But the cane beside her was quite tall. Rain spotted them almost immediately upon entering, his gaze quickly locking onto Juliet. He paused, then looked at Kane before turning away. With both lively protagonists gone, the crowd gathered at the entrance gradually dispersed. Juliet could still hear the murmurs around her. I just asked someone from City N about it. Apparently, Rain originally had a well-matched girlfriend. If this woman hadn't interfered, Rain wouldn't have married her. I really can't understand what he was thinking. That woman clearly has no sophistication and can't handle important occasions. With this scene, even if others don't say it, they've definitely offended the hosts of the engagement party, trying to make something of themselves in City H now. Difficult. The father of this young lady getting engaged today holds significant power and comes from an influential background. As they spoke, the two walked further away. Juliet listened secretly, her footsteps unconsciously following them, but Kane's strong arm pulled her back, locking her in place. The engagement ceremony is about to begin. Where do you think you're going? Juliet was too embarrassed to say she wanted to eat more melon. Kane pressed his lips slightly downward, so concerned about Rain's affairs. Juliet tilted her head to look at him, only to see him lazily lowering his eyes with an air of nonchalance, as if he had just casually uttered those words without a second thought. After all, they had been married for several months. Juliet and she had come to understand his temper somewhat. The young master was in a terribly foul mood. After a moment's thought, she loosened her grip on his arm, letting her hand fall naturally before lightly tracing her fingertips against his palm. Kane paused slightly, the color of his pupils deepening. In an instant, he averted his gaze, his large hand naturally grasping hers. Mrs. Lester, this level of flattery isn't enough. Is that so? Then forget it. Juliet twisted her wrist as she spoke, trying to pull her hand back. Kane tightened his grip slightly. He gazed at Juliet for a long moment before finally sighing. Wouldn't it be better to ask me about Rain's matter? Juliet followed his steps, then realized after a moment. Did you have a hand in this? Kane raised an eyebrow. Guess. Sometimes, Juliet really found him quite infuriating. She pursed her lips and walked to her seat, sitting down properly. Kane followed and sat down as well. When it came time to exchange engagement rings during the ceremony, Kane suddenly leaned in close. He came so near that his lips almost touched Juliet's ear. "The woman that Lauren mentioned was arranged by me," he whispered, his scorching breath hitting Juliet's ear, making her shrink her neck slightly. Kane added, "Today, I delivered that woman's information into Lauren's hands. That woman was someone he came across by chance. With just one glance, he thought she resembled Juliet. Since he feels this way, Rain surely will too." He didn't make a fuss, just quietly helped behind the scenes to connect that woman with Rain. He had figured out Lauren's temperament, knowing she wouldn't be able to hold back and would make a scene. Juliet looked at Kane with some shock. She never expected that the mastermind behind Rain and Lauren's messy fallout was actually him. After a long while, she finally spoke. "My ear itches." Kane chuckled quietly and sat up straight again. After the engagement ceremony concluded, they stayed for dinner, followed by exchanging pleasantries with the guests. During this time, Juliet excused herself to visit the restroom. "Just as I turned the corner of the bright corridor, I saw Rain leaning against the wall smoking. The trash can beside him was visibly filled with a thick layer of cigarette butts. The surrounding smoke was so dense it seemed to veil even the overhead lights." Juliet wrinkled her nose in disgust and immediately turned to find another restroom, but Rain clearly saw her too. "Juliet, could you talk with me for a while?" "No," Juliet answered in her heart without stopping her steps. But after all, she was wearing high heels and was soon caught up by Rain. He stood in front of her. The cigarette that had been between his fingers now discarded, but the thick scent of smoke still clung to him. Juliet frowned and took a step back. "What do you want?" Her resistance was all too obvious. Rain's eyes darkened as he let out an ambiguous scoff, probably from smoking too much. His voice carried an unmistakable hoarseness. "Juliet, I regret it. I regret why I couldn't resist Lauren's temptation and betrayed you. Regret not cherishing the feelings between us properly. Regret." His brows were tightly furrowed, looking as if he had a bellyful of words to pour out, but Juliet's patience was limited. With no time to waste listening to his nonsense, "Rain, there's no such thing as a pill for regret in this world. Even if there were a pill for regret, and I had to choose again, I would still leave you. You know my temper. Had I known you'd been fooling around with Lauren 3 years ago, I wouldn't have waited until you proposed to her. I'd have dumped you right then." Rain held his breath, his face visibly paling. He stared fixedly at her, trying to detect even the slightest hint of reluctance in her expression or eyes. But he didn't. Finally, with desperate hope, his gaze fell upon her wrist. There lay the proof that she had once loved him. Juliet following his gaze. Her first instinct was to hide her wrist behind her back, but he was quick to seize it. With a slight exertion, his thumb slipped between the watchband and her wrist. The pad of his thumb came to rest directly on that scar. Rain pressed down with some force. "I don't believe it. I know your temper, but I also know how much you like me. You can't let go." He didn't notice that his voice trembled slightly as he spoke these words. Juliet ignored the pain in her wrist and used her other hand to forcefully pry Rain's hand away, even digging her long nails into his flesh. "That just proves you don't fully understand me," completely shaking off Rain's hand. She stepped back several paces. "You have no idea how happy I've been since leaving you." With those words, she didn't linger any longer, turning to leave directly. Rain watched her retreating figure that held no trace of nostalgia, feeling only that the corridor lights were too harsh, stinging his eyes until they brimmed with moisture. Juliet returned to the banquet hall after visiting the restroom. By now, Kane had far fewer people conversing around him. Juliet walked over, and Kane immediately wrapped his arm around her waist. The next instant, he frowned. Juliet didn't notice anything unusual about him, only hearing him say, "It's about time, let's go." Without giving it much thought, she followed him out of the banquet hall. The valet immediately went to fetch their car. While inside, she hadn't noticed, but the moment they stepped out, Juliet felt a cold wind blowing against her face. Immediately after, Kane's coat was draped over her shoulders. This was followed by his slightly reproachful tone. "You knew the temperature was dropping, why didn't you bring a coat?" Juliet pressed her lips into a faint smile and was about to speak when a voice cut in from the side. "Senior." Both turned curiously toward the source of the voice, only to find it was Lauren, who hadn't left. The doorman immediately spoke up. "Mr. Kane, President Lin, we've already tried to drive her away, but she insisted on staying, and being pregnant. They were afraid of getting themselves into trouble." Juliet shook her head. "It's fine." Kane also just glanced over before withdrawing his gaze, as if he hadn't even heard Lauren call him at all. Lauren bit in her lip. "Senior, you helped me back in school, now, could you?" As if ashamed to speak further. She trailed off here, biting her lip in silence, yet the way her eyelashes fluttered was utterly heartrending to behold. Actually, Juliet rather admired her. After causing such a scene today, she still dared to cozy up to Kane like this. She was quite curious about what Kane's reaction would be to Lauren's request, so Juliet remained silent, but Kane didn't speak either, only squeezing her palm where their hands were joined. "Senior," Lauren called out again unwillingly. Kane seemed to finally realize she was addressing him. "Are we that close?" Lauren shrank her shoulders, her eyes instantly reddening. She took a small step back, then seemed to gather her courage and stepped forward again. "Senior, we used to be in the same club together." At this point, she cautiously glanced at Juliet. "You said back then that if I ever had any difficulties, I could always come to you for help." As if feeling embarrassed, she lowered her head. But a tear plopped audibly onto the floor. Though she knew exactly what kind of person the other was, Juliet still stared in stunned silence. Kane glanced at Juliet, a hint of helplessness in his eyes. Yet when he spoke, his tone remained distant. "I say that to every new member who joins the club." After a pause, he added, "Taking someone's politeness as a command shows pretty low emotional intelligence." Lauren's face genuinely paled this time. Just then, Juliet's car was brought over, and Kane quickly pulled her inside. The entire way home, he remained silent, under the car's ceiling light. His cold and aloof expression still carried that untouchable aura, clearly not someone to be trifled with. Yet Juliet dared anyway. "Aya, why didn't you help me, Senior?" Kane cast a fleeting glance in her direction, then he drove the car even faster. Upon returning home, Kane immediately pulled Juliet into the bathroom, without giving her a chance to react. He lifted her chin and kissed her directly. With just 2 light touches, he frowned and stepped back, reaching to turn on the shower. Juliet's clothes were instantly soaked through, clinging tightly to her body. Looking up, she saw Kane staring at her intensely. "I don't like the smell of others on you." Juliet paused for a moment before realizing it was the scent of smoke from when she had encountered Rain that had lingered on her. Water streamed down her cheeks. Kane lowered his gaze to look at her before bending down to kiss her again. This time, it was much more urgent than before. Juliet clung to his shoulders, bearing the force of his movements. Tonight, he carried an inexplicable wildness about him. Juliet mused hazily when she heard Kane press close and ask in a tight voice, "Why aren't you angry?" Her clothes had long been discarded, their scorching skin pressed together, leaving her no capacity for thought. "What?" Kane bit lightly at her collarbone before lifting his head with labored breath, his cool-toned voice gone hoarse. "When Lauren said those things, why didn't you get angry?" Juliet could only think how utterly intoxicating his voice sounded right now, until he bumped into her hard. "Don't you care about me at all?" Juliet only then realized he was upset about this issue. So not only did he feel possessive of her, but he also wanted her to care more about him. Then, was his concern for her simply because they were married, or because he wasn't completely without feelings for her either? Juliet, her mind raced as she opened her mouth to speak, but Kane maliciously thrust harder, shattering the words she was about to utter. The ceiling light swayed relentlessly above her, blurring her vision until the scene before her grew indistinct. Later, she only vaguely remembered being coaxed into calling him Senior countless times. When she woke up the next morning, Kane was unusually still at home instead of having left for the office. He lay beside her, his strong arms encircling her, eyes closed as if still asleep. Juliet sorted through the jumble in her mind and finally remembered, back in college, there had indeed been a prominent senior named Kane, but at that time, her heart had only held Rain, leaving little room for anything else, so her memories of those days were faint. At that moment, Kane raised his hand, covering her eyes with his large palm. "Sleep a little longer," Juliet blinked. "Did you know me back in college?" Kane slightly clenched his palm. "Yes." "Oh." Juliet lay quietly, recalling everything Kane had done since their marriage. After a long silence, she asked again, "Kane, why did you agree to marry me?" The next instant, she felt the arm around her waist tighten slightly, lifting her up a bit. Then, she found herself staring into a pair of dark eyes filled with helplessness. Kane let out a sigh and pinched her cheek with just the right amount of force. "Of course it's because I like you." He said it was because he liked her. Juliet was stunned once again. Kane brushed aside the hair by her cheek and admitted, "That's right, I waited until the white moonlight broke up with her boyfriend." Juliet felt nothing but chaos in her mind, unable to process it. Instinctively, she reached out and tightened her arms around him. It wasn't until noon that the two finally got up to wash up. Juliet habitually scrolled through her phone. Yesterday, Lauren and Rain's incident was still filmed by someone with ulterior motives and posted online. Even though Rain's family acted quickly, taking down the related videos within minutes, some netizens had already saved them and recognized Rain in the footage. Even with the Rain family stepping in to suppress the discourse, they couldn't completely erase all related discussions. Rain was already struggling in City H, and with this incident sparking covert targeting, their situation became even more precarious. But Juliet paid little attention to these matters, instead devoting all her energy to an international design competition. Even Kane found himself somewhat neglected by her. Half a year had passed. After the new year, the competition results were announced. Juliet only received an honorable mention award, though she knew her skills weren't quite there yet. She still felt somewhat disappointed, but the happy news is, Lucy invited her back to City N for her birthday. Juliet readily agreed. Kane also cleared 2 days from work and tagged along. Juliet never expected that this trip would lead to another encounter with Rain. At the entrance of the Carlson family's old mansion, Juliet got out of the car and saw Rain approaching from a distance. By his side, there was also a woman. It wasn't Lauren, but a woman with somewhat similar features to her. Juliet felt a bit uncomfortable, but she just frowned and walked into the mansion with Kane. As if unintentionally, Kane spoke up. Rain has returned to City N. Juliet looked at him. Wasn't that obvious? Kane smiled. What I mean is, he couldn't make it in City H and went back to City N. Is that so? Kane raised his eyebrows. Really? Juliet curled her lips. Did you do this behind the scenes again? He gave a light hum. You could say that. He had merely set up some minor obstacles. After a few seconds of silence, he added, who told him to keep thinking about you? I won't feel at ease unless he's driven out of City H. This man is quite petty. Juliet thought to herself, yet she didn't find anything wrong with what he had done. After all, in the battles of the business world, the winner always takes all. She smiled and hooked her pinky finger with his. Kane narrowed his eyes, as if seeking praise, and continued, the Rain family's roots are in City N, but Rain insisted on going to City H to grab a slice of the pie. Without enough preparation, it ended up affecting the main family. Now, although the Rain family in City N still holds a top position, their standing isn't as secure as before. It seems she truly didn't care about Rain at all anymore. Juliet hadn't paid any attention to Rain's affairs afterward, and now hearing about it evoked no extra feelings, just a faint sense of wistfulness. But she still nodded cooperatively. That's quite good. Kane's expression remained unchanged, but his mood clearly improved. But after entering the mansion, she shook him off and went to find Lucy. Kane could only follow at a distance of 3 meters, avoiding any chance of overhearing conversations between the girls that weren't meant for his ears. Rain also stood not far away, staring intently in this direction. That gaze was impossible to ignore. Kane frowned in disgust and took a few steps forward to block his line of sight. Lucy snorted and muttered under her breath, so annoying, I really don't want to invite Rain to my birthday party. But I have no choice, there's history between us. And you know what, I used to think he was a good man and perfect for you. Now looking back, I feel like slapping myself. You wouldn't believe it, despite how doting he seems with that woman by his side, he's actually keeping several others on the side. The man's practically begging to die in some woman's bed one day. After saying this, she abruptly changed the subject. Now that I think about it, Uncle Lin had better judgment. Mr. Kane treats you well, doesn't he? Your studio's reputation has even reached our City N now. Anyone can tell our young director Lin is living the good life just by looking at you. Juliet couldn't keep up with her machine gun-like chatter. Alright, stop teasing me. Fine, let's change the subject. Lucy tilted her chin toward Kane, who was looking down at his phone, and asked in a hushed voice, someone like Mr. Kane is pretty impressive, right? Juliet nodded, then belatedly caught the teasing glint in her eyes and realized there was more to her words. She sighed, can't you focus on something serious for once? Lucy chuckled and looped her arm through hers, steering the conversation to other topics. After such a long time apart, the two sisters stuck together until the birthday party ended. Lucy couldn't bear to part with Juliet. Childhood was better. We had so much time to play together. After growing up, you started revolving around Rain, then went abroad, and after returning, you moved to City H. Lucy sighed. I'll come visit you in City H. Don't find me annoying when the time comes, okay? I won't, Juliet smiled. They talked for quite a while longer before Juliet left. On her way back to the hotel, passing by an amusement park, Juliet happened to see someone removing their mascot head. It turned out to be Lauren. She couldn't help but take a few more glances. Why is she here? Lauren had a decent education. Even if she left Rain, she shouldn't have fallen to this state. Besides, at this time, Lauren should have just given birth, and Rain's family wouldn't have treated her poorly. Right. Kane followed Juliet's gaze and glanced over. Forgot to tell you, Lauren later used the child as leverage to argue with Rain, but ended up being pushed by Rain and had a miscarriage. Rain wanted to divorce her, but she refused outright and even threatened suicide multiple times. In the end, Rain simply kicked her out, leaving her with nothing but the empty title. City H had no place for her, so she had to return to City N, but Rain's mother held a grudge and pulled some strings, making it impossible for her to land a decent job. Kane paused. She brought this on herself. Don't feel guilty about it. Juliet certainly didn't feel guilty. She watched Lauren's figure disappear in the rearview mirror, then put it out of her mind. Outside, the neon lights dazzled, and suddenly some sentimental thoughts rose within her. Will Juliet's husband stay with Mrs. Lester forever? The car came to a stop right in front of the hotel entrance. Kane turned his head to look. His usual casual demeanor absent from his expression, he spoke solemnly. I will. Juliet smiled. If it was with Kane, then, for the moment, she seemed able to believe in love again. Not far away, Rain, who had followed them all the way here, sat in the car, watching as Juliet and Kane walked hand in hand into the hotel. Though he could only see their backs, he could still sense the unshakable bond between them. At that moment, he finally gave up all hope, with a bitter smile. He realized he had truly lost Juliet forever. In the pitch-black carriage, only a flickering flame remained. The end.